Nestled deep within a valley was the little village of Walton. It was a quiet, peaceful one-horse town, free from the trends and troubles of a fast-paced world. Indeed, it's an ideal sanctuary for any individual who desires to get away for a relaxing weekend. If you were to visit, you would meet some of the nicest people in the whole country. There's Mr. and Mrs. Herman, who own the general store and the local gun range. Then there's Mr. Mark Jensen, a millionaire who's known for his good, wholesome holiday parties he hosts throughout the year. And then there's Gary Owls, a nice fellow, but somewhat unusual. To put it bluntly, Mr. Owls is what many would call the oddball of the village. The man is perfectly sane, but he has some unique hobbies. The most well-known is his fascination in local legends, particularly of ghosts. Yes, old Gary was a phantom fanatic. The whole town knew it, and if anyone wanted to hear a spooky tale, he was the go-to guy. Thus begins our story. It was a sunny October day in 1985 when a young female reporter by the name of Miss Hazel Winters came to town. She was on an assignment to collect, record, and publish stories dealing with the rural legends and folklore. It's a job she'd sought for a long time and was eager to hear any story that the local residents might be willing to share. Naturally, Gary Owls was quick to capture her ear, and it wasn't long until he monopolized her attention.
Well, it looks like I really hit a gold mine by coming to this town. You certainly have some interesting stories, Mr. Owls. I'm sure that my magazine will be most grateful. What I really need now is for you to pick a story of great importance to you and let me document it in an article.
It's an honor to share our folklore with such a nice young lady like you, Miss Winters. One story that few people know about, mind you, that it really happened in the past, is the legend of the old Kenmore house. Some say it's haunted. Are you interested?
Fascinated.
Very well. Let us begin. There once was a millionaire by the name of Jeb Kenmore. He was a kind, generous old man, full of humor, and a bit of a prankster. He loved being around his friends and family, but sometimes he longed for privacy. It was about 20 years ago that he decided to build himself a hideaway house, a place where he could retreat and enjoy the forest. Originally, he intended to keep it small and simple, but as it progressed, he found himself wanting to expand it. People who worked on the house say that he would add on one addition after another, much to their frustration. He hired and fired contractors frequently, and they learned that if they wanted continual employment, they would have to give in to his every whim. The interior was odd, to say the least. One room was typical to any modern household, the next, antique or mysterious. They say that he was into photography, and he had one room painted completely black for a background. Some say that he added secret passageways. Others speculated that he dug an underground tunnel system. Why? The reason is still unknown to this day. We do know that he planted a laurel maze in the backyard, possibly for his grandkids to play in when they came over to visit. Unfortunately for Mr. Kenmore, he never lived to enjoy his house. Just as the final coat of paint was applied, he had a sudden heart attack and died. Few in the family even heard of the house, and so it sits, abandoned to this day. Not many people go there, and the few that have had reported hearing strange, unearthly noises coming from the nearby woods. Recently, I've heard tales of people seeing ghostly apparitions around the vicinity. I heard one rumor claiming that the real reason for Mr. Kenmore's death was because he built the house on top of an old Indian burial ground. Thus, he died for desecrating it. Another says a great evil phantom, half man, half barn owl, haunts the forest nearby and claimed his life. Speaking of owls, it seems that the only wildlife known to frequent the vicinity are spiders, rats, bats, and owls. Anyone who hunts there will tell you that game is scarce, and most hunters don't go there. Wildlife such as deer, bears, wolves, and elk all seem to sense some sort of evil lingering in that area and avoid it. Now, how's that for a story?
It's all very interesting, Mr. Owls. But why did the family abandon it like that? Couldn't they at least sell it?
Well, to tell you the truth, most of Mr. Kenmore's family seldom showed interest in his hobbies. They were more focused on social status and rank and ego rather than caring for each other as a family. The only one who did take possession was his eldest son, Hector Kenmore, and he left it pretty much as is. People are allowed to explore the house, providing that they first check in at the sheriff's office and sign a waiver agreeing not to sue if he or she gets hurt.
Well, that was an absorbing story, Mr. Owls. Tell me, do you know where the house is? I would like to photograph it for my magazine.
Of course, it's about 15 miles from here, and it's deep within the woods. Not only that, there's only one way in, and the road is narrow and unpaved. I have been there only once, and it's full of potholes.
I'd be grateful if you could take me there. I'll pay you, naturally.
Payment isn't necessary, Miss Winters. I'll be happy to drive you there, but be advised on the road conditions.
I understand. Well, I have a few things to take care of. Will you be open sometime this afternoon, about 2:30?
It'll be an honor. I'll pick you up outside your motel.
Excellent. I'll see you then.
Later that afternoon, Gary drove Hazel up to the house. The road was rough, bumpy, and littered with potholes, just as he said. After a seemingly endless trek, they at last arrived at their destination.
Well, here we are,
announced Gary as he turned off the engine. He turned to Hazel to see her trapped in some sort of daze.
Miss Winters, we're here,
he said forcefully. At this, Hazel snapped out of her daydream.
Sorry. I guess I was overcome by a sensation. A sensation that began once we neared the house. I cannot explain it, but I feel that there's something calling me, beckoning me to enter that house.
I'd rather you don't, young lady, for your own good. It's dangerous in there.
Please, Mr. Owls, let me finish. I guess I got it from being intrigued with the architecture. I've always been fond of neat old houses, and this one is the perfect house. If I ever became a homeowner, this would be the house I would like to have. At the same time, I also feel this place somewhat foreboding, as if an evil force awaits me. Some sort of unspeakable horror desires to have me. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not myself right now.
I think you've been daydreaming too much during the drive. Better get out. The walk will do you some good.
The two strolled about the house in silence, with Hazel stopping every few minutes to take a picture. Gary could tell that she had become fascinated with the house, more than just a professional interest. He knew that the longer she stayed here, the more determined she'll become to enter the house.
You know, I wouldn't mind spending the night in this house. Of course, I'll get permission and sign the waiver with the police.
Hold it right there, young lady. You'll do no such thing. Please understand, I'm thinking of your well-being.
Who do you think you are, Mr. Owls? My father? Why, I'm a grown woman, for crying out loud. Besides, I have a concealed carry permit.
What might harm you has no respect for bullets, ma'am.
And what might harm me other than humans, Mr. Owls? The boogeyman? I must admit that I have an uneasy feeling about this place. But it's nothing my handgun can't handle.
You think so? I see that I must inform you about an unpleasant truth. Would you mind coming with me? There's something I must show you.
Why? What is it?
Just follow me and stay close. Maybe it'll explain something. I don't know what, but all the same, I feel compelled to show you.
With that, Gary took her by the hand and led her to a trail leading into the woods. As they made their way through the thick forest, Hazel couldn't help but sense that something was watching them. The trees seemed to become thicker and darker, more twisted every step she took. Suddenly, Mr. Owls halted and pointed straight ahead.
Tell me, Miss Winters, what do you think about that?
Hazel looked, then gasped in horror. Dead ahead was a hillside, and at its base there was an enormous cave entrance, forbidding, dark, and intimidating. Miss Winters found the cave to be appalling. It certainly was the creepiest cave she'd ever seen in her whole life.
What a dreadful cave! Oh, Mr. Owls, please take me away from here. I can't stand to look upon such a horrific thing.
Yes, Miss Winters,
Replied Gary as he led her back to the truck.
I now hope you understand why I wanted to show you this. It was for your own good.
As they made their way back to town, Mr. Owls began to question Hazel about her experience.
What did you feel when you saw the cave, Miss Winters?
You know those sensations I felt when we first arrived? Well, the forbidding one, the one that warned me of danger, was intensified 100-fold. I could feel that whatever the evil was that awaited me was in there. Oh, this is silly. Why are my emotions running away with me? I'm not usually like this. Perhaps my imagination was getting the best of me. You know, because of the story you told.
Perhaps, but let me tell you, Miss Winters, I too had those feelings when I came here for the first time. Like you, I was drawn to the house, but when I stumbled upon the cave, I was overcome with fear and left in a great hurry, I might add.
So it's not just me? What then is it? Why is that place so strange?
Take my advice, Miss Winters. Publish your story and forget about it. I too thought about exploring the mystery behind that place, but I've learned that it is best to leave some things alone. Let the mystery be. I suggest that you do not disclose the location of the house, for we don't want others to meet their end.
What do you mean?
I didn't want to disturb you anymore, Miss Winters, but I have heard several reports of people being found dead by the cave entrance. From what I gathered, nobody has ever explored it. Some say it's the gateway to Hades.
What?
Yes, the Indians called it the Cave of the Dead. All who venture into it never return. I didn't want you to include that part for your magazine story, so I left it out, for fear it's too morbid. I'm sure your boss wouldn't want you to fill his magazine with tales of death and fear. No, a simple mystery house would do just fine, and we needn't shock people with the rest of the story.
Hazel did what Mr. Owl suggested, and the story went viral. Her boss was amazed how the story sold his magazine. It wasn't long after the first printing that Mr. Thompson, Hazel's boss, called her into his office and gave her an increase in pay.
I'm so happy with your work, Miss Winters. You certainly have earned your raise.
Why, thank you, Mr. Thompson. I will do my best to be worthy of it.
It's my pleasure. The story you wrote has done wonders for our business. Why, I've been getting scores of letters and phone calls requesting a sequel to the story.
A sequel, sir?
Why, of course. You obviously left the story unfinished. Brilliant! For instance, you failed to mention the exact location of the house, and yet you show a photograph of it. Talk about a stroke of genius. There are so many questions deliberately left unanswered. Right now I have customers asking what exactly caused the death of Mr. What's-His-Name. They also want to know if the house is really haunted and by what. And finally, what's the cause for that strange, uneasy sensation you experienced while visiting the property? All these questions must be answered, Miss Winters. You can't leave our audience hanging.
No, of course not.
This is why you must write a sequel, to answer all those questions, and then write a final and concluding story where you recall your personal experience of spending the night there.
Spending the night there? At that house?
Why, of course. Eventually, everybody's going to request it. Think of all the sales we'll make from it, Miss Winters. We might go nationwide.
Sir, there's something you ought to know. I left a good portion of the facts out of the article on purpose, but without the intention of writing a sequel. You see, I know a lot more about the Kenmore house than I want to, and I'm afraid that the rest of the story is quite morbid and depressing. I'm sure that our audience wouldn't want to read of such things.
What things?
Well, I told you about the feelings I got at the house. You know, the feeling of fear, the one that warned me of danger. That feeling intensified when Mr. Owls took me to a nearby cave. I'd never been there before, and yet I knew without a doubt that there was something evil in it. Whether it be animal, human, or demonic, I cannot say, but this I know for a fact, that if I stayed there, I was in danger of my life. I begged him to take me away, and he did, and that's when he told me the other half of the story. You see, whatever lives in that cave could very well be the real cause of Jeb Kenmore's death. Mr. Owls told me that people have been found dead at the mouth of that cave. The Indians used to call it the Cave of the Dead. They say that all who enter it never return. Hopefully, you now understand why I hid the information from the public. It's so depressing. Why, ever since I've been to that place, I've been having nightmares. Some about the cave, and others about the house, some about the maze, and finally one about that phantom known as the ghost owl.
Mr. Thompson mused for a moment. He strolled about the office in silence. Hazel began to wonder if she'd gotten herself into trouble. Finally, he spoke.
Miss Winters, I thank you for telling me the truth and your fears. You were wise to leave this information out of the article. Our audience wouldn't be able to handle it. But now they are begging for it, regardless how morbid it might seem. Tell me, my dear, are you afraid to return to that house, spend the night, and face up to your fears? Or would you rather hide from them like a little child frightened by a thunderstorm?
Inside of me is a war raging, Mr. Thompson. One half of me wants to go back and overcome my fears. The other half reminds me that self-preservation is more important than courage or honor, and certainly more than money.
Why do you fear that place, my dear? I'll tell you why. It's because you've been conditioned to. If it wasn't for Gary Owl's story, you probably wouldn't be afraid now, would you?
Perhaps. Then again, I've never heard or seen that cave before, and yet I was terrified of it.
Nonsense! You were still under the spell of Mr. Owl's story when he showed you that cave. Why, it's probably still floating about in your subconscious mind, which will account for the nightmares you had. Oh, well, you can't win them all. If you want to back out now, I won't hold it against you. Perhaps I can find someone else to visit the Kenmore house. Naturally, there will be a large bonus as a reward.
You mean replace me for the final story?
Well, I haven't got much choice in the matter. If you're determined not to go, I won't make you. It just seems a shame to have to send someone else. After all, you were the right person for the job.
I made up my mind, Mr. Thompson. I'll do it.
Good girl. Now I suggest that you go home and relax for a few days. You need to clear your head of Mr. Owl's fairy tale before resuming your assignment. Remember, I want you to put your safety first. You're not obligated by any means to stay if you feel that your life is in danger. All I want you to do is check in with the sheriff's office, sign the waiver, and stay as long as you feel safe. I also suggest that you bring a gun with you.
Oh, yes, I intend to.
Smart girl. Well, I have a meeting to attend. That will be all, Miss Winters.
A few days later, Hazel traveled again to the village of Walton. She was not alone, but was accompanied by her good friend, Olivia. Olivia heard about Hazel's traumatizing experience and came along to comfort and give her support. Once they reached town, they sought out the sheriff's office.
Are you sure you don't want me to spend the night with you? After all, you told me you had that dream again.
I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. After all, it's only a dream. Now let's get this show on the road.
Are you sure that the police will permit you to spend the night at the Kenmore house? After all, it is an unusual request.
Why not? The worst that can happen is that they say no. Besides, our boss informed them about our intentions earlier this week, and they didn't raise any objections then.
As they entered the building, they were greeted by one of the deputies.
Hello, ladies. What can I do for you?
I would like to fill out a waiver. My boss contacted you earlier this week and told you that he was sending a reporter up to the Kenmore house. Well, I am she.
Oh, yes. I remember now. You're Miss Winters, correct?
Correct. My friend Olivia will be staying at the motel tonight while I'm at the house.
No, I see no reason why you two couldn't spend the night there together, providing that your friend consents to signing a waiver, of course.
No, officer. I must do this on my own. You know, personal reasons.
Very well. Please fill out this form, and I'll give you a permission slip. We sometimes have our deputies visit the Kenmore house from time to time, and this slip will verify that you're not a trespasser.
I must say, it seems that the owner actually wants people to visit his property.
He does, ma'am. When Hector Kenmore inherited the property, the first thing he did was grant permission for all law-abiding citizens to visit his house at will, on the condition that they check in with us first and sign the waiver.
Naturally, with everybody being so happy these days, it's a wonder he opened up his property in the first place.
Hector Kenmore is just like his father. Kind, thoughtful, unselfish. Yes, it's a pity you never had a chance to meet him. He's in Europe on a business trip. You might find him quite handsome.
Oh, a bachelor?
Uh-huh. And very polite, too.
Thank you for your help, officer, but I doubt he'll be interested in me. I'm just a simple reporter and used to being single.
The two women started for the door. Suddenly, Hazel paused. Turning to the officer, she asked,
Deputy, have you ever been to the Kenmore house?
About 4 times. Why?
Have you ever felt a sensation, a mixed feeling of being drawn to the house, but at the same time, a feeling that something was out to get you?
Now that you mention it, I have. It happened the first time I went up there. But to be fair, I recently heard Gary Owl's rant about it being haunted, so no doubt my mind was playing tricks on me.
And the other times?
Well, that sensation grew fainter and fainter each time I went up. Now it's no different than any other place that I patrol.
Have you or the others ever seen a cave around the vicinity?
No, there's no cave around the Kenmore house. None that we know of, at least.
An eerie sensation crept over Hazel. Perhaps there was something to be afraid of lurking about in the woods. Something more substantial than just her imagination or Gary Owl's wild stories. Thanking the deputy, she joined her friend outside.
Where to now?
Where else? To the Kenmore house.
After a long, bumpy drive, the two women finally reached the property. Olivia found herself being intrigued by the structure of the house. As Hazel looked for a way to enter the building, Olivia noticed the maze out back.
Hazel, come here, please. Is that a maze I see over there?
Yes, It was planted by the late Jeb Kenmore for his grandchildren, providing they should visit, of course.
It's really overgrown. It would be nice if someone would fix up the place. It would make a great hunting lodge.
Right now we must focus on the present, Olivia. Help me with this door.
Finally, after a struggle, the ladies managed to get the front door unstuck and entered the building. Despite being vacant for 20 years, the house was surprisingly in good condition. Hazel was enthralled by the interior and wasted no time snapping pictures. As the two friends explored the various rooms, Olivia began to sense that they were being watched by something evil. She could tell that Hazel sensed it too, for she was checking every room and was always looking over her shoulder. As Hazel peered into one of the bedrooms, she gasped in horror. There, on the wall, was a gigantic oil painting of a great, hideous owl. Normally, Hazel wasn't afraid of owls, but this one gave her the creeps, for it was a monster. It had a head of a barn owl, with devil-like horns protruding from its head. It had monstrous claw-like hands on its wings, and the body was more elongated than a normal owl, more like a human, but with feathers. Hazel seized the painting and showed it to Olivia.
Goodness gracious, what is that horrific thing?
That has to be the phantom owl, the ghost that Gary told me about. I will not spend the night in this house with that horrible painting.
What are you going to do with it?
I'm going to destroy it.
You can't do that. It doesn't belong to you.
I don't care.
Look, Hazel, I have an idea. Give me the painting. I will take it into town, and that way you won't be bothered by it. I'll put it back in its place in the morning when we leave.
Well, all right. Here, get it out of my sight. It provokes me. I have to get settled in now. It's going to be getting dark soon.
Oh, I need you to drive me back into town.
Why?
Well, because you'll need the car, of course.
No, Olivia, you keep the car. After all, it's yours. You can pick me up tomorrow morning.
I can't leave you all alone in the woods without transportation.
Why not? I have food, water, and a handgun for protection. What more would I need?
Supposing there was an accident and you got hurt, how would you get back?
If I get hurt, your car would be little use to me. Come on now, Olivia. We've been friends for a long time. I have always catered to you. Now will you please let me have my way?
Well, all right. What time do you want me to come and get you?
8 o'clock sounds good, but you can come earlier if you want. I probably won't get much sleep tonight.
With that, the two friends parted company. As Hazel watched her friend drive off, she began to sense that something was watching her. Hurrying back into the house, she shut herself inside and bolted the door. She then set out to lock up the rest of the house. Once it was secured, Hazel began to feel better. Taking out a can of soup, she then proceeded to prepare a meal for herself, hoping that by getting busy, she would keep her mind off Gary Owl's troubling story. The hours dragged by slowly. The sky grew dark and darker as clouds inched their way across the heavens. As the night came, a thunderstorm rolled on in. Hazel was listening to her portable radio on the weather forecast when there was a sudden knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Grabbing her pistol, she pointed at the door and demanded,
"Who's there?"
It's the sheriff's department. Open up.
Boy, I'm glad it's you. Your knocking really gave me a fright.
Oh, sorry to have startled you, Miss Winters, but I decided to check up on you and see how you're doing. Oh, I see you've made yourself quite at home.
Yes, but don't worry, officer. I'll clean up after myself. You know what they say, leave no trace. Well, I intend to do just that.
I'm glad to hear it. I see that you have brought along protection. You're a smart woman.
Thanks, officer. I hope I don't have to use it.
Just to let you know, ma'am, your friend stopped by the office and showed us that painting. You know, the one with the hideous owl on it.
She shouldn't have done that.
Perhaps, but her visit worried us a bit. That's why I came by, to see how you're getting along.
Well, as you can see, I'm alive, healthy, and in the process of having a good meal. Would you like to join me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't stay. I hope to see you in the morning, but until then, I wish you a good night.
Thank you, officer. You too.
The hour grew late. By now, Hazel had finished her dinner and was sound asleep. She was confident that she had overcome her fear and was dreaming peacefully when she was suddenly awakened by a noise. She listened. All she could hear was the storm outside. She closed her eyes to go back to sleep, and there it was again. Picking up her handgun, Hazel quietly sought out the sound. She followed it upstairs to the very room where she saw the painting. As she searched the room with the flashlight, she noticed one of the windows swinging free in the wind, slamming against the frame. Muttering to herself, Hazel closed the window and bolted it shut. Suddenly, she heard a scream coming from downstairs. She raced back down the stairs into the parlor where she slept. To her alleviation, she saw that the radio had been left on and was playing a late-night drama channel. Giving a sigh of relief, Hazel turned off the radio and lay back down. As the night wore on, Hazel found it more and more difficult to sleep. She finally gave up and decided to read a book. She went to the library and there found a vast assortment of books, which puzzled her.
Why would a house that never has been inhabited have books?
After picking a book from the shelf, she returned to the parlor and snuggled up in her sleeping bag. She opened the book. She noticed that a piece of paper had been inserted between the pages. She pulled out the insert and dropped it in horror. On it was printed a copy of the Phantom Owl, the same rendition of the painting she found earlier. In a mix of fear and anger, Hazel tore up the picture and lay quaking for some time. After a while, she gathered enough courage to go back to the library and put away the book. After she put the book up, she wondered if there were others that had the inserts in them. Just as she was about to pull one out, she heard a tapping on the window behind her. She spun around to see what it was and gasped in horror. Peering through the window at her was a demonic-looking fiend. Hazel snatched up her pistol to shoot it, but by the time she lined up the sights, it was gone. Hazel was now beside herself with fear. She raced about the house, rechecking the windows, closing the drapes. After she finished, she collapsed on the sofa, thoroughly exhausted. How she regretted coming here. She had never been so frightened in her life. Without warning, a ghostly moan echoed throughout the room. Hazel shuddered with fear. She could hear the sounds of dragging chains coming down the hall. Despite being terrified, Hazel regained her composure and rose to her feet.
Who's there? Answer, or I'll blast you.
Everything was quiet. Then the scream of a barn owl was heard.
Stop scaring me! Whoever you are, this isn't funny!
The scream came again.
Why don't you leave me alone? I haven't done anything to you! Please just leave me alone! I'll be gone in the morning, promise I will!
She suddenly noticed a shadow from the hallway. Hazel raised her gun.
Go away, or I'll shoot you!
Instead of retreating, the shadow came closer and closer. And then she saw what caused the shadow. She fired, but to her horror, it had no effect. She fired again and again, but still the thing came towards her. Hazel was now beside herself with fear and fled the room in a state of panic. She locked herself in the library, but there she had another surprise. All the drapes were open, and several of those demon-like things were at the windows, picking the locks, trying to get in. She hurried into another room, and there she saw another monster coming for her. Fortunately for her, the library had a third exit, so she was able to make an escape. By now, Hazel was desperate, She fled from room to room, hoping to escape the demons and the monsters. She pounded on the walls in hopes of finding a secret passageway, but to no avail. She made it to the back door in hopes of escape, but the demons were already there, waiting for her. They tried to seize her, but she slammed the door in front of them. With her heart pounding, Hazel raced throughout the house, frantically seeking a way to escape. All was quiet that morning when Olivia returned to pick up her friend. She spent most of the night worrying about Hazel. Somehow she felt that she had made a terrible mistake by leaving her friend all alone in that house. As she pulled into the driveway, she honked the horn and waited. All was silent. Olivia's patience began to wane. She honked the horn again, and still nothing happened. Finally, Olivia gave up and went up to the front porch. Pounding on the front door, Olivia shouted,
Hazel, wake up, you sleepyhead. I've come to take you home. Come on now. I know you like to sleep in, but I have stuff to do today, so let's go. Hazel, come on, girl. Why don't you answer me?
The only response Olivia got in return was silence. An eerie, dreadful silence. By now, she was frantic. She tried opening the front door, but it was bolted shut. She hurried around to the back door and found it wide open. Olivia raced into the parlor where Hazel was staying, only to find it empty. Miss Winters and all of her belongings had vanished. Olivia was beside herself with worry. She raced about the house, frantically searching every room. After she finished turning the house inside out, she searched the yard, the maze, and finally the surrounding woods. At last, she gave up. Her friend had literally evaporated into thin air. She decided to check the house one more time in a vain hope that she might find Hazel. As Olivia probed the various rooms, she had a sudden inclination to recheck the bedchamber, the one that had sported the painting of the phantom owl. As she peered inside, she was startled by an unpleasant surprise. There, on the wall, was the picture of the phantom owl, the same one Hazel had removed. Olivia had brought it with her, but she recalled leaving it in the car. How did it get from her car to the wall without her doing it? It should still be in the car, but all the same, there it was, hanging in its place. Worst of all is that somehow, someway, her friend Hazel had been added to the painting, laying dead at its feet. Olivia got the message. This was a job for the sheriff. Within a few hours, a search party was ordered. For most of the day, the sheriff, his deputies, and many of the townspeople probed the Kenmore house and the surrounding forest, looking for Hazel. But it was all in vain. Hazel Winters, along with her belongings, had vanished without a trace. And so the search party eventually gave up. It was shortly thereafter that Mr. Kenmore returned from his trip to Europe and found himself in a rather sticky situation. Some of the townspeople blamed him for the young reporter's disappearance. But that's for another story. So what became of Miss Winters? Some suggested that she had gotten into debt, so she used the legend of the Phantom Owl to disappear and start a new life. Others say that she was frightened away by some sort of prankster. Many in the sheriff's department would speculate that she met with foul play and was either killed or abducted. Of course, Gary Owls would tell you that all those explanations are pure nonsense. He is certain that Hazel Winters had offended the ghosts of the forest, and thus was spirited away by the Phantom Owl.